everyone. Welcome. My name is Paige, and I'm with Deschutes Public Library, and this is part of Deschutes Public Library's virtual programming. Tonight, we have a wonderful presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Central Oregon Writers Guild to get us started with, of course, our featured reader and all of that great information. And they are also going to share with us some upcoming events that we have going on. Thank you all for being here. And remember, you can check out this video and all of our other wonderful, fun, free programs at our Deschutes Public Library YouTube page. So after the program, let us know what else you want to see coming to your Deschutes Public Library. Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce Central Oregon Writers Guild.
Okay, I'm going to do a quick screen share of our Central Oregon Writers Guild webpage here. Just want to give everyone a quick update as to what's going on in the world. Of course, we have Beth Alvarado and Kelsey Freeman this evening talking to us about writing across difference. Over here on this side, we've got all the events that I know of. If you know of others, feel free to email us at centraloregonwritersguild@gmail.com. And we've got, let's see, today is here. We have some authors readings coming up. We've got some workshops coming up. We've got a workshop with Jane Kirkpatrick, who's here in the audience through the library. We have more author readings. We've got our Central Oregon Writers Guild. I don't know why that says May workshop. That should say June workshop, and I will fix that. But that June workshop is with Beth and Kelsey, and hopefully they'll talk a little bit more about it tonight. There is room in that workshop, and I highly recommend joining in on that. Remember, Central Oregon Writers Guild members are only $10 for these workshops. And these are 3 to 4 hour or 3 hour workshops with some really cool people. So it's a super deal. We're fortunate in that we got a grant from Deschutes County to be able to pay for those so that we don't have to pass that cost along to our members. What else do we got? We have our Irene and my writing salon, or actually it's everybody's writing salon. Kim Cooper Feinling is going to read. She just published. Her book is going, is I think published as of today. We'll put that on the website too under our member highlights there. Emily Carr is going to be doing a workshop up in Sisters. That's going to be the first in-person workshop that we've had in a while. That'll be outdoors up at Sisters Library. And coming up July, we've got Kristen Dorsey. We're going to be virtual in July. Jason Graham, mostly WADA, is going to be here for us August. We have an August workshop, also virtual. But as of September, we're going to be doing semi-in-person classes with the library. So we've got Jamie Houghton in September. We have Ellen Santasero in October. We've got Sarah Sear in November. Workshop with Geronimo Johnson, who's teaching with the OSU MFA program, and then our member reading in December. So as far as those public in-person meetings, I was going to have Paige talk a little bit about how those are going to work.
Yes, we are very excited that come September, Deschutes Public Library will be able to open back our meeting rooms in limited locations. So for instance, on our second Tuesday of every month, Central Oregon Writers Guild meeting, we will have the chance to do a hybrid meeting in which a limited number of people are allowed in the Brooks Room in the downtown Bend Library. And then we will also at the same time be live broadcasting this program to all of you who would like to watch from the comfort of your home and wherever else you may be. So we will have some spots available. This will be a registration basis just to make things easy. And we'll be able to provide more direct instructions to everyone closer to the date about how you can join either via Zoom or via the program in person. Come September, the first Monday of September is Labor Day, so skip that one. But then starting the second Monday in September, we will also have our much adored quiet writing time. This is 3 hours on every Monday And we will have the downtown Ben Brooks room. We'll have tables set up socially distanced, and we will invite members to come in, and it's a quiet space to write for that amount of time. And you can answer emails, you can read a book, you can be working on your great American novel, whatever you'd like, we have the space for you. So I'm really excited to have that. No registration required, just like always. We hope to see you there.
All right, thank you. Kind of excited to get back into seeing other humans in person instead of virtually. So we have our featured reader coordinator, Mary Krakow, is going to introduce our reader this evening. And if you are interested in being a featured reader, Paige, Eliza, Linda, Kathy, Carol, Henry, Randy, you're already in, but you can do it again. Amber, Jane, Irene, Judy, Michelle, if you are interested, in the chat right now is Mary's email address. That's right, isn't it? marykrakow@gmail.com.
That is
and
correct.
That is correct. Email Mary and say, hey, I'd love to be a featured reader. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Mary Krakow, and she's going to introduce our featured reader. All you.
Thank you, Mike. I was going to make a plea for readers, but you've already done it. So good job. Okay. So tonight's featured reader is Randy Workman. He is a writer. His articles, essays, and poetry have appeared in the Seattle Times, Placed, and Encyclopedia of Central Oregon, Volume 1, and in 433, a daily magazine of art, literature, and politics. So, Randy, we're excited to have you read for us today. Take it away.
Okay. This is called the Frank Zappa poster. The house is almost fully automated. I rather pride myself on my technological prowess. So good am I that I've renamed my eavesdropping big tech company products. I use the name Ruby instead of their given names. Good night, Ruby, and all the lights throughout the house turn off, doors lock, shades automatically close. At the appropriate time, I command the floors to be cleaned and our robotic vacuum cleaner rolls out, moving deftly around furniture. Away from the home, my phone has the same magical powers. Ruby, play Britney Spears. I do that for the kids, but truth be told, I don't mind a few tunes from her before I put on my music that my daughter-in-law calls dad rock, which I find demeaning. My son has a framed poster of Frank Zappa sitting on the toilet, hanging in our basement. I guess that's dad avant-garde. At the start of the pandemic, my son, his wife, and their 4-year-old moved into our basement area where they have a bit of autonomy with extra bedrooms and bathrooms. We are now one big happy Waltons-like family. Kids working remotely downstairs, my wife working part-time watching our grandson in her office. I'm usually out golfing or reading. Today was one of those rare times during the pandemic that everybody was out safely doing errands and chores. I thought I would surprise the gang with my specialty butterscotch cookies. I had all the ingredients: flour, mixing bowl, spatula, and mixer spaced out around the kitchen counter. I could feel my stomach rumbling, but I was on a mission to make my treats and create a nice cooking aroma throughout the house. I rolled out my dough of cookies and was cutting them into perfect circular shapes. Meanwhile, my stomach was flipping and flopping for no particular reason I could think of, so I just continued to ignore it. The oven was properly preheated, and I could already smell the dough and butterscotch. My stomach was done complaining, and I could tell action was going to have to be taken. I just wanted to get the cookies into the oven. Oh man. I quickly stuffed the cookie tray into the oven, slammed the oven door shut, and made a dash to the bathroom. I had to rapidly penguin walk with one hand holding my buttocks together, and I just made it into the bathroom. I start to pull my pants down, and my cell phone is in my back pocket. I toss it to the floor. Otherwise, I'm afraid it would fall into the toilet. Disaster averted, so I thought. Once my phone hit the ground, it sent out an emergency alerts to my wife, son, daughter-in-law, and next-door neighbor. They received 3 texts. The first was, I need help. The second text read, please help me. The third text was a picture of me sitting on the toilet with the pants around my ankles with a map locator. Now the phone is ringing. The doorbell is being repeatedly pushed. My daughter-in-law is pounding on the bathroom door asking if I'm okay. I'm fine. In the background, I hear the smoke alarm buzzing. I leave the bathroom, wash my hands, and head toward the kitchen, and the fire department is rolling up and the neighbors are standing on the sidewalk. I turn off the oven. I go out to tell the fire captain what happened, but she already knows and is stifling her laugh because apparently she saw the picture text too. As word spread, the neighbors dispersed with laughter heard down the street. My son and wife drive up. It's an embarrassing story and a cautionary tale about too much technology. I suppose it's good for a reminiscing laugh. In the basement now, there's a framed 8x10 photo of me sitting on the toilet next to the Frank Zappa poster. Thank you.
Nice job. I love that the neighbor was involved with that too, that we texted the neighbor. All right, we are gonna, I'm gonna introduce Beth and Kelsey, who are gonna take it from here. Beth Alvarado is the, yep.
The chat is disabled on my computer. I don't know if it's disabled on everyone's.
Paige, is that a,
Okay.
It's good now.
That should be fixed. Thank you, Mary, for bringing that to our attention.
You bet.
Okay. Did everybody get the chat that I sent out with Mary's email address? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. All right. And Mary, by the way, thank you. Mary rounds up these people that we get a chance to listen to, and she does this tirelessly and is always really efficient with it, and I really appreciate Mary. So thank you, Mary. Okay, so Beth Alvarado is the author of 4 books: Jillian in the Borderlands, a cycle of rather dark tales; the essay collection Anxious Attachment, which won the 2020 Oregon Book Award for Creative Nonfiction; Anthropologies, a Family Memoir; and Not a Matter of Love and Other Stories, winner of the Many Voices Project Award. She lived and taught in Tucson, Arizona until she migrated north to Bend. She teaches for the OSU-Cascades Low Residency MFA program and is the recipient of an Oregon Literary Career Fellowship. Kelsey Freeman is the author of the nonfiction book No Option But North, The Migrant World and the Perilous Path Across the Border, which was a finalist in the Oregon Book Award and Colorado Book Award. And we'll find out if it's the winner of the Colorado Book Award in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, somewhere in there. The book is based on a year of interviewing Central American migrants on their journey north through a Fulbright fellowship that she received. She's presented and interviewed across the country on immigration policy. She currently works at Central Oregon Community College, where she runs a college readiness program for Native American high school students. When she's not writing or teaching, Kelsey serves on the City of Bend Accessibility Advisory Committee, teaches personal finance workshops in Spanish, and spends time in the mountains. And I'm super appreciative to have you both here. I'm going to let us know how you want to interact communication-wise, and I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, I think we're just going to try to have a conversation and then take questions and answers. We'd like to open the conversation, or if you have a question while we're talking, if you raise your hand and we notice, we'll call on you. So I think we would like this to be as interactive as possible. But I think Kelsey also took us finals in statistics today or something. Oh my God, she's busy. So I know, statistics. So she's going to start us off. We're both brain dead, but she's younger than I am. So
I think that's right, that we just want it to be a conversation. I think there's so much we can wrestle through with these themes. So I think Beth and I will kind of talk a little bit about what we've thought about in the ways in which we've approached our books as it comes to, this theme of writing across difference. But yeah, I want to hear from you all too, and your questions and thoughts. So first, just a little bit about me and my book. Like Mike said, it was based on a year I spent in central Mexico on a Fulbright grant interviewing primarily Central American migrants that were coming through Mexico. And I started off this project really because I was wrestling with race a bit. I write in the start of my book, the book is called No Option But North. I write about how I wanted to do this project because I had this conversation with the man next to me on the bus when I was traveling, doing research for my undergraduate thesis. And the man he was from Southern Mexico, had lived in California, had been deported from California. And he asked me, how is it that you can come to my country to study my people for 2 weeks when I've been repeatedly denied for a visa to go back and visit my family in your country? And so that to me, it hit home and stuck with me because I didn't have a good answer at the time. But it caused me to want to dig deeper into how is it that nationality and class and race all play a role in who gets to come here legally and who has to undergo this violent journey north that I wrote about. So I was really interested in these themes of race and privilege and power as I was thinking about how this plays out in immigration. And then as I kind of sat down to write, I continued to wrestle with these themes. But I think regardless of what we're writing about, if we're writing about people, I know the theme is writing across difference, but for me, I'd like to talk specifically about race and writing across racial difference. Because for me, that's where the thorniest questions have been. And so, but I think, if we're writing about people, we're writing about race typically in some way or another, even if we don't say the race of our characters, or even if, in my experience as a reader, I think those messages filter through. The reader at least is projecting their image of who they think they're reading about. So I think developing our own critical eyes around race is helpful no matter what we're writing about, so that we can really be self-critical and ask ourselves, are these authentic characters? Are we perpetuating stereotypes? Are we doing, having the impact we want to have with our writing, or doing a disservice to the people, our characters or the people we're writing about? So as I sat down, there's kind of two parts of it that Beth and I were talking about. There was the process of writing, and then there's the craft of writing. And so just as I was thinking about how did race and writing about race play a role in the craft, first of all, as I've thought about what is my role, and as a white writer, I identify as white, in writing primarily about people of color, right? Central American migrants that were coming through Mexico. What is my role? What is the impact I'm having? And I think what I've come to is that, I want my readers to empathize and hear the stories and then connect it to the structural and political realities that create those stories. So I'm hoping they'll make the connection. And I thought a lot in the stories, because I feel comfortable, forever writing about policy, right? But when I'm writing about people, it becomes a little bit thornier. But I think in the stories I selected from the interviews that I did, I wanted to maintain this balance between highlighting really, they're sad stories and really heavy stories. But I didn't want to just focus on, the most violent, the most, disheartening, because I think that turns the people I'm writing about into victims. It robs them of their agency. And so I was always thinking about this balance between writing about violence to the point where you almost sensationalize it,
Yeah.
Versus writing about, the real realities that people face. So I was always thinking about balancing that too.
Mm-hmm.
I think too, because I've always struggled with this balance between telling stories, sharing stories, and speaking for people. And
Yeah.
I think it's a balance that I constantly have to be checking myself on. And I think because it's situationally different. But when it came to writing, I think, for me, it wasn't about this telling people stories as if they couldn't tell them themselves. It's not about giving voice to the voiceless, that refrain we often hear, right? It's rather, for me, it was about giving voice to the structural injustices and inadequacies that render these stories possible in the first place. So with the stories that I chose, my goal was to highlight the dignity of the person and situate it within the violence they're experiencing, right? Because especially Central American migrants are heading north, they're navigating this web of violence where they don't know, who might be against them, who might be targeting migrants, etc. So I wanted my readers to understand that reality, but I wanted them to see them as human too, right? And emphasize these really human traits. I think one of the things I didn't realize as I was writing, but got pointed out to me by a friend, was that I write a lot about, body positioning, or the way in which someone was seated as they spoke to me. And I think part of that is humanizing, right? It's about bringing my readers there into the room with me of the migrant shelter where I was doing these interviews, so that they could, see through my eyes. And that kind of brings me to my third decision when it comes to craft, which was to put myself into the book. So my story is in there. It is fundamentally my story. Because I think if we're trying to understand migration, it's not only about understanding the policies behind that, but it's also about taking it a step further and understanding what are the power dynamics that create those policies, or that make those policies possible, if that makes sense. So I wanted to get into that in my book too. And I think the way I came about it was sharing some of my stories, what it was like to be, living in Mexico for a year as a white woman, the ways in which I had power and privilege that others didn't have. I can read just Beth and I talked about sharing a couple tidbits from our work that highlighted or where we were kind of wrestling with these themes. So I'll read just a really short excerpt that was one place where I inserted myself into the story as this attempt to try and point out that that the instances in which my voice kind of had unnatural weight in Mexico, and the ways in which that wasn't true for the people I was writing about. So this little section is called the 23-year-old expert. Oh, we forgot to tell Kelsey, the English program coordinator at the university where I taught, announced in an impromptu meeting. Not a good sign. What do you need? I asked cheerily, trying to maintain my air of always willing to help when I was dreading yet another assignment for which I was not qualified. Remember, we're having our end of year event on Friday. Students are going to share their work, and parents will be there, and we're inviting the mayor and people from the newspaper. We put you down as the MC of the event. You're okay with that, right? His right cut off any opportunity I had to say no. So instead, I tentatively replied, I can do that, with big pauses in between each word. But why would you want me to introduce all these projects? I only have a faint idea of what students are doing in other classes, and I'm sure I'll make mistakes with my Spanish. But I knew why they wanted me to MC. It was the same reason they would periodically cancel my classes to send me to college fairs around the city, despite the fact that I knew next to nothing about the university. I was white and American and thus brought this exotic air of internationalism that the school could use to burnish its image. When I studied abroad as an undergraduate in Yucatan, Mexico, I conducted a community-based project about Mayan education. While digging through the nuances of Indigenous relations in Mexico, I began to see firsthand which groups were associated with success and which were stereotyped with backwardness. I worked at a Mayan preschool in the rural village of Canicar, and in subtle and blatant ways, Western values, people, and modes of thought were exhibited as exemplary models to follow. While pictures of white cartoon characters brushing their teeth and behaving well were plastered on the walls of this designated Indigenous school, the hashtag Es de Indios, meaning that's so Indian, paired with backwards or out of style situations, circulated on Twitter. There's a hierarchy of cultures, colors, and races in Mexico. Suddenly I found that my barely adult voice was afforded more weight than it merited, than it would have had I not been a white American. The most blatant example of my undeserved stature came just before the teachers were scheduled to have a training day, meaning they would come in on a national holiday to listen to presentations about pedagogy. A few days before the training, the language coordinator asked me to speak. About what? We would love it if you talk about how you see the university. I pondered this broad and inherently problematic assignment and then responded, what exactly do you mean? Well, tell us how you see things here, my boss responded. What do you think works well? What should we do differently? How do you think the students are doing? With no visible way to get out of it, I agreed. For 2 days before the training, I stressed about the speech. In the end, I did not talk about my perceptions of the university. Instead, I used the time to clarify my role as an assistant, emphasize that I was not an expert, and offer a few ideas as an outsider, not an authority. As the story of privilege played out at my workplace, I thought of Roberto, a migrant from El Salvador. With a degree in computer science, he was heading north, willing to take whatever work he could get. I'll take a job scrubbing toilets, and I'll be happy to just have a job, he told me as we spoke on a rainy afternoon. Unlike the way my Mexican colleagues viewed me, he knew that Americans would not see him as the expert in his field. The power structures would not work in his favor. At my desk, as a 60-year-old professor asked me how to teach didactic text, I pictured Roberto, wherever he might be, and wondered what kinds of questions would be placed before him. So with that, I think, the idea of putting myself in the book helps me navigate that space where then I think readers and white readers, who is my audience, were able to see things through my perspective. So that was kind of my intentional decision there. Let's see, anything else? I guess just in terms of the process as well, a few decisions I made there as I was navigating what my role was. First of all, for the first few months that I was in Mexico, I didn't interview anyone. I just went to the shelter. I had informal conversations with migrants that were coming through. I read incessantly to try and develop my own foundation of understanding before I asked anyone to share their stories. And that was intentional because I didn't want the people I was interviewing to have to explain things to me. to have to situate me within what they were experiencing. I wanted to already have the background understanding so that when, you know, migrants use particular words or talked about particular situations, I could at least know where they were at or where they were coming from. And then after I felt ready to interview, I would record if they were comfortable. I would take notes if they were comfortable. And I would, you know, talk about, I felt very hesitant at first to ask people if they wanted to share their stories. I felt like I wrestled with whether it was my place. But ultimately, I was surprised by how many people did want to share their stories. And I think people said because they wanted, you know, Americans to know. They wanted to know about, or people in the US to know about the choices they were making, the impossible situations they found themselves in. So being really clear and upfront with the people that I was interviewing was key as well. And I also wanted to make it a little as reciprocal as I could. So one of the things I felt like I could offer, I was there in 2016 and 2017. So when Trump was running for office and then after he was elected president, and there was a lot of rumors floating around about what would change, you know, some of it very true, some of it, you know, more rumors passed down and whispers from migrant to migrant. But I felt like at least that was something I could help with, was sifting through policy, right? And sifting through, okay, what could change under President Trump and what's not going to change, so that migrants could at least help make sense of it a little bit. And I could represent myself and my country. So, you know, I think I continue to wrestle with, do I have the right to share these stories? I think it's a question I want to keep wrestling with and keep asking myself, because I think it depends situationally, you know, as I'm doing, you know, now the book is out and doing speaking events, you know, I've had times too where I wonder, you know, should I be talking about this? Should I be the one speaking on this right now? And I you know, I have different thoughts at different times. I think times when I felt more tentative about it, then or there were times when I felt more tentative about it. But then I also had a conversation with a student of mine who's undocumented and, you know, came to one of my presentations, and we maybe were going to do a joint presentation, but she said, no, I don't want to be there. I want you to speak. This is everything I want people to know about immigration, but it's too close to me. It's too personal. I don't feel like I want to step in front like that and speak on these things. And so it's a privilege to speak on these things too, right? To not be so tied up in it personally. So that's one, on the one hand, one of the things I think about. And I also think that for me, because I'm writing about this very specific topic, right? That's so politically relevant right now. I think also the burden of calling for or speaking out on migration policy, on immigration policy, shouldn't just fall on immigrants too. So when we think about like, well, who has the right to speak on these things? That's part of it for me too, is that, yeah, I think it does take all of us. So I continue to think about all these themes, but would love to continue to talk with you all and hear what Beth has to say too.
Okay. Well, thank you. So it's funny because we did talk about last night about that question, like who has the right to tell these stories, or who has the right to tell other people's stories. And that's something that I'm, thinking about in the context of another book that I'm working on. telling the story of a cousin of mine who disappeared in Greece in 1967, and the family never talked about her. And so now I've written this, almost 400-page book about what happened to her. And I know it's something that my family didn't want anyone to talk about. And I keep asking myself, well, do I have the right to tell her story? And that's, like a family thing. It's not even, but so this morning I was thinking about that, who has the right to tell stories in terms of our conversation yesterday. And I thought, that's not even the right question in some ways, like who has the right to tell the story? And I think that what you've just said really points to the real answer is, do we have the authority to tell the story? And so authority, the root of that is the word author. How can we author, stories based on other people's lives? And so that I think leads to the question, like, do we have the knowledge to tell them credibly, accurately, fairly? And those are the things, it seems to me, like that you really do have. Like you have a knowledge of the language. You lived in Mexico for that year, listening to people. You also had the humility to ask the question. Like, I think there's, in order really to tell other people's stories, you need to realize that you can't necessarily do it justice, that you're only doing the best you can, and the respect to try to tell those stories responsibly. In my case, again, most of my writing is so far has been writing about family, and I am not fluent in Spanish. But I lived in the border area. I lived in Tucson for over 40 years, and for longer than that. And my late husband was Mexican American. He was 4th or 5th generation. He was fluent in Spanish, and so again, I still, even though we were married for 40 years, there are certain ways in which, no matter how long you're married to someone, how much you love their family, the fact that I had his children, I'm still an outsider to his culture. There's no way that I'll ever be able to know what it meant to grow up as he grew up. It's still the only way that I can know anything is by listening and, trying to have empathy and put myself imaginatively in that situation. So just for instance, in one of the essays that I wrote in Anxious Attachments, I just suddenly got really nervous. I don't know why. In one of the essays that I wrote in Anxious Attachments, after my husband died, I decided to take a trip to Mexico, to the place where his father had grown up. And his father had grown up in Guanajuato, near Guanajuato in Jalisco. And his father had always told us, don't go there. Don't have nothing to do with those people. And it was because his father was orphaned as a child. And so anyway, so when I was writing this essay, somebody, a reader wanted to know, well, how did my husband identify? And I thought, that is such kind of a funny question, because while he was alive, I never asked him, how do you identify? Like, why do you, when someone would ask him what he was, he would always say, I'm Mexican. But he wasn't Mexican. Mexican's a nationality, not an ethnicity. And so when I was writing this essay and I needed to talk about why he identified as Mexican, I had to go to Gloria Anzaldúa. I had to go to another writer to, understand how the man I was married to for 40 years, why he called himself Mexican. And she says, Gloria Anzaldúa says, we say nosotros los mexicanos. By Mexicanos, we do not mean citizens of Mexico. We do not mean a national identity, but a racial one. We distinguish between Mexicanos del otro lado and Mexicanos de este lado. Deep in our hearts, we believe that being Mexican has nothing to do with which country one lives in. Being Mexican is a state of soul, not one of mind, not one of citizenship. And so, I mean, it's just funny that I have to use someone else to kind of define the way that I think he identified himself. But of course, I can't even ask him if this is accurate. But it just, for me, it just goes to kind of not making assumptions about how people identify, why they identify the way they do, no matter how well you know them. And I think, you know, in nonfiction, when you're making assumptions, you need to acknowledge that, or do some research, or you allow the person to speak for themselves in your work. So fiction's a little bit different, but I don't know if anyone has anything that they want to say at this point, or if there are any questions. So I can't see your name. Okay, Randy.
I have a question, and it's to either one of you, but basically my degree is in journalism. So if you're interviewing somebody, they're agreeing to let you tell their story. So there should be no question about whether you should tell their story or not if they're talking to you, right? I mean, I'm just asking, I don't know.
Well, neither of us are journalists. So,
but did you tell them it was going to be for a book or something, or?
I mean, this is really funny because in this book, Anxious Attachments, my kids don't read my work. My daughter opened it to a page where I quoted her, and she was mad at me for 2 or 3 days. And now I am forbidden to quote her. I mean, I can still write about her, but I am not allowed to quote her without her permission. So journalism, I think there is a kind of contract with the person that you're interviewing, and they give permission, and probably, you know, maybe they even have to sign something. But in the essay form, I mean, we write about people that we know and love all the time, and it doesn't occur to me to ask their permission, because I feel like in that case, it is my story. But Kelsey, did you have to get permission?
Yeah, and that's part of the process, in that I wanted to be really clear with, at that point, I didn't know like the book would be published. I didn't know, but I said my intent is to publish these stories. And so, yeah, I wanted to be very clear with where they would go. I worked with my sister too, who's a photographer. She came and met me for the last 6 weeks and took photos. And so with that too, we wanted to be really clear about where the photos would go, what they would be used for. But I think whether the question of do I have the right has come not from, you know, the people I interviewed. Everyone I've stayed in touch with and who has read the book or heard about the book is, you know, is happy about it. But more, I think it comes from just conversations around literature, you know, here in this community, I think, and around race in this community, and just on the national level, kind of the debate there.
Well, there's also the issue of appropriation. Yeah. Right. Of taking someone else's stories and kind of, I guess, repackaging, maybe especially in fiction, repackaging them as your own and not acknowledging where those stories come from. That seems to me dishonest. And I think, you know, part of writing about other people, then, especially people of another race or another community, would be the issue of appropriation, which is but here's a question. I had a question, Ari Anzaldúa, and you mentioned her. In my understanding of her, she embraced her origins, including European origins, and that was part of her triumph, her ability to reconcile her ancestry of colonizer and colonized. Any thoughts on that? And well, I think that, you know, I mean, even in terms of Mexican American and Mexican, you know, to come up with the term Chicano is partly, you know, looking at all of your origins, which might be Indian, Spanish, well, European, colonizer and colonized. You don't really, I mean, do you have a choice? You know, I mean, I would think, you know, I'm guessing, but I would think that my husband would say, either you reconcile that or you live feeling like a divided person. Yeah. But I mean, I don't just channel the dead here.
Yeah, Jane, did you have something?
I did. I really appreciate the conversation. And one of the thoughts I had, because I write mostly novels and they are historical, but they're based on the lives of real people, some of whom are of other cultures. I think that the three kind of craft things that you mentioned, what's my goal for the reader, telling the stories, or balancing that with speaking for others, and then putting yourself inside the book. The first two really fit well with fiction, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also thinking that putting yourself inside the book may also work well with fiction. I'm sure you're aware that in some of the more recent, in the last year or so, some of the publishers have been using what they call sensitivity readers.
Oh.
So, people present proposals or manuscripts or whatever, and someone, unbeknownst to them or who they are, makes a determination about the appropriateness of that manuscript, and whether that author has handled well the racial issues. And I wonder if maybe, I think these sort of craft things and the thing you mentioned about you can live with someone for 40 years and still there's unresolved and surprises.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just wonder if you would care to talk a little bit about sensitivity readers that are happening within our universe now.
Wow. So with fiction, with Jillian and the Borderlands, I did have, because I'm not fluent in Spanish, and there's Spanish throughout this, I did have I had two people read it for the Spanish, read both for the correctness of the Spanish and then whether or not it was idiomatic. Right, because I was really going, I speak Spanish, but I'm not fluent. And I was going based on, what I had heard in the last 40 years, the ways that I had heard people talking, because I go back and forth between Spanish and here, Spanish and English. But then one of the women that corrected the Spanish for me also, she was a kind of sensitivity reader. And she pointed out a couple of things that, I really had wanted to ask someone to do that, but I was kind of shy about it. I felt kind of weird, like going to a friend and saying, hey, will you read my book and see if I'm sensitive enough? Have I said anything that could possibly offend someone? And I didn't want to ask any of my husband's family members. I don't know. I was just feeling really weird about it. But she was helping me do publicity and I'd hired her for that. And I knew she was Hispanic. So I told her, I want you to read the book and, let me know if there's anything you feel I should change. And there were a couple of really small things, but but again, that goes to, being knowledgeable about that culture, having lived in that culture for 40 years, I had already a good sense just a good sense of what these characters were like or how they would think or anyway, so I did kind of use a sensitivity reader, and I certainly did have people check my Spanish. I thought I'd read you a couple of little things. I have these two characters. One of whom is a curandera, and she lives she's Mexican, she's from Mexico, and she's based on, her name is Juana of God, And she's based on this guy, Juan of God, who was a Brazilian traditional healer. And I saw him on an Oprah show. And my niece, who, happens to be Mexican American, was living with me at the time. And she saw the Oprah show and she said, Beth, come here. Here's your next Jillian story. So Juan of God is based on this person I saw in Oprah. And then I have another character who is, was a migrant and lived in this country illegally for years and gets deported. And so they both are the characters who speak more Spanish. So one of them, this is Marisol. And she's been deported. And after she's deported, she's working at Juana of God's place in Magdalena. And she says, she says, why does she say that? Oh, Juana es de Dios, no sé. Anything is possible, pues. But when you clean a person's toilet, you know things about her no one else should know. Juana is of the flesh, and God is ineffable. Of this I have no doubt. Perhaps God works through her in the way he works through all of us. An act of kindness here, you give money there, a crust of bread, a tortilla, whatever you can, because the beggar at your door may be the savior. Quien sabe? Who knows? You never know. But does this mean Juana is any closer to God than the rest of us? Je ne sais pas, as the French would say. I don't know why I thought it was so funny to have Marisol speaking in French at the end of it, but I thought, why not? She could, that was totally possible. And the story that Marisol tells there about why you are always generous, why you always give the stranger food, is directly from my husband's mother. I mean, she used to always say that. You never know if the beggar at the door is the savior. And then, so then this is Juana. She had a Chihuahua that channeled the spirits, and that was how she could heal people, because this Chihuahua would channel the spirits. And then the Chihuahua dies at this one healing. And so this is Juana of God speaking, and it's at the memorial service for the Chihuahua. After all, she said, the line between body and soul is mutable, a border one crosses every day and every night, a liminal space like air over the surface of water. Somewhere invisible to the human eye, she said, things that seem different are really the same. Como el aire y el agua son los mismos. There is a space right on the surface of a lake where air molecules sink into the water just as the mist molecules rise to meet them. We are all, como se dice, mist. We are all mist, niebla, fog, fantasmas, ni aquí ni allá, pero son los mismos, juntos. In death as in life, the spirit lives. So again, there, I really feel with this character that I was, channeling some of my husband's philosophy. And so I felt like I was able to get these characters to have them feel authentic and their points of view be authentic, because I had listened to him, talk about these spiritual concerns a lot during the 40 years of our marriage. So in that way, and also they're individuals, as characters, they're individual characters. But I think that because I was, writing fiction or writing nonfiction based on my life, I had, different challenges than Kelsey did. And I think that Kelsey's challenges, partly because she's more directly critiquing and confronting the politics, are more, are bigger challenges, and are probably, there are more issues there. It's more difficult. I mean,
I don't know, but I think when it comes to, like, I was thinking about this theme of question of sensitivity readers, and I think it's kind of a gift to have someone to read through your work and really think about it from different perspectives. Mm-hmm. I tried to do that on my own work. I tried to, read criticisms of other books that were kind of racial criticism, or that mishandling of racial issues, and really put myself in that mindset to be really critical towards my own language. And then I read through the manuscript with that like lens. But you're never gonna, we all have our blind spots. You're never gonna catch everything. So yeah, I had friends that were willing to read it as well. And it's such a gift. But yeah, it's a weird thing too, because it's a long process, right, to read through a book and to comment on it. So it's only something I felt comfortable asking with a couple of close friends. But I think too, it brings up the question of audience again too, because if we're thinking about if our audience is purely white and we're writing what we think white people will want to consume, then we're not worried about it maybe. But I think that's an issue as well, because I think I didn't, I thought of my audience as primarily white, and I think it has been primarily white, but I've been surprised in the conversations I've had with readers too. I did this radio interview with a Spanish language radio station in California, where the host was talking about the book and was saying, to his Spanish speaking audience, have your children read this book, have these conversations. And I had never thought of it that way. And so that would only, I'm not saying, I didn't have any blind spots in it, or the book was done perfectly or anything like that. I'm just saying that I think being really, really critical about how we address these topics for ourselves allows us to reach wider audiences too, and allows more people to buy into what we're saying, and to, I think, if we go to the theme of our workshop too, which is building bridges, I think it can be such a powerful thing. I was telling Beth too, I went to a book club a couple weeks ago, the first time in person, which was really cool. But the book club was, all white women who had read the book and just had so many wonderful questions and were really engaging with the topics, and you could tell really felt it. And so, you see the power of writing there too, for all different audiences. So I think the more we can be critical of our words, the more we reach different audiences.
Yeah. So Kathy had a question.
Yeah, this is probably more of a process question for Kelsey. I find it interesting. I've been struggling for years, actually, with writing some nonfiction about homelessness. And I think of it as big, really big picture questions, which essentially you've taken a really big picture question, immigration. And it really caught my attention that you integrated yourself into the book. And I thought maybe that's why I can't approach my topic, because I've never thought of it that way. But more important, I'm thinking, how do you take a big topic and just keep narrowing it down to a takeaway message for the reader? Do you just keep writing into it, and writing into it and writing into it? Or did you kind of have some, I don't want to say roadmap, but did you kind of have a feel for where you were going from the beginning, which I doubt, but I'm curious.
I think it was more the writing into it. I had questions in the beginning. I think as I was shaping what I wanted to focus on, I was really focused on this theme of migration by necessity. Mm-hmm. And what does it mean when you're, this is your last option, and what does that look like? What does the journey north look like then? But what I would do is I'd do an interview, and then I'd listen to it, transcribe pieces that I wanted to use, translate those, and then write like a short vignette about that story, or as a story about that person. So that was kind of my process. But in terms of, I think just the more I interviewed, the more pieces there were to this larger puzzle. So in some ways it grew outward, right? And it grew so big and I had all these different strands. But I think allowing that to happen then allowed me to narrow it back in to where am I actually taking this and what strands do I bring in and which do I leave out. I don't know if that helps.
Well, I think more and more people are doing that. I mean, maybe not in strict journalism, but I think more and more people who are writing creative nonfiction and go into, you know, small communities, working with the homeless, those kinds of things, they are writing themselves into the book. For one thing, it just seems so much more honest, right? Like you're there, you have to reveal things, you have to be vulnerable, you have to reveal things about yourself. The reflection is then reflection from the person who's there, instead of writing out from a distance as if you're an authority or something. Do you know what I mean? I think it would.
Yeah, actually, it's really poignant for me because the reason that this became such a topic for me is because I lost my eyesight as an adult. So I was, you know, I rely on public transportation and I saw a whole different class of people. And, you know, kind of, you know, as the problem got worse and worse, it became more and more apparent to me. Whereas if I lived my normal privileged life that I had before when I could see, I would have never come across the things that I've come across. And you're right, I never thought about really writing myself into that story. I kept thinking, I'm seeing all these things, how do I put that on paper? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it would actually make the book so much more interesting too, because you'd have this other narrative thread that's holding everything else together.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a question here. So it says, I just finished reading American Dirt by Janine Cummins, a novel about a woman fleeing with her son across the border. She too worried about whether she should tell this story, but then she thought, if you're a person who has the capacity to be a bridge, why not be a bridge? And then somebody else answered, yes, Linda, that author was heavily scrutinized. And I think it's really interesting that we bring up Janine Cummins, because that was the first time that, Kelsey, why did we meet? Did we meet to talk about Janine Cummins, or is it just that we both had books coming out and that book had just, do you remember?
I think we just met, but that book had just come out and there were just, you know, people writing about it and the controversy kind of evolving from it. And so, yeah, we ended up talking about that a lot.
Yeah, and it made me very nervous because, you know, I'd written this fiction and, but I think, you know, part of the objections to Janine Cummins was simply that she got a 6-figure advance. And there were a lot of Mexican American and Central American writers who'd been writing about these very issues and couldn't get published, or could not get a 6-figure advance. So, and then also that to a lot of people, the work seemed inauthentic. I mean, I think she did spend time in Mexico. Like one writer that wrote a review that said if they just, you know, packaged this as a, you know, kind of escapist novel, it would have been fine, but it was, you know, the new Grapes of Wrath. So in some ways, it wasn't even Janine Cummins that was being critiqued. It was the publishing industry, the fact that they gave her such a huge advance and, you know, touted the book as the voice that gives voice to Mexicans fleeing the cartels. So it's kind of unfair to her. But I mean, I suppose she could have objected.
Yeah, I think, you know, if I agree, part of it is the apparatus all around her, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, there was critiques about how at her book launch party, there was like, you know, people called it border chic, right? Like nail, manicures done with the border fence and things like that, you know, it takes a really harrowing issue and makes it into kind of this thing for consumption, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's I think too, it's just asking ourselves again, how do we balance like people's dignity in there and the dignity of our characters?
Yeah.
And so, but I think a lot of it too, like it does highlight inequities in the publishing industry that, yeah, Luis Alberto Urrea spent 10 years trying to get his first book published and now is a really esteemed author, right? But he was interviewed about the book and kind of made that point that, yeah, there are so many of us who are Mexican or Mexican American or immigrants who write about these themes that don't get our voices heard.
Yeah.
And so I thought about that with my book. Well, is my book doing a disservice because it's a voice that clouds out these other voices? And so I've thought about how can I help that not be the case? And part of it is just bringing up the books that I've, really admired as I do, as I talk, etc. Yeah, Michelle.
Yeah, Urrea. Michelle?
Hi. Yeah, this topic is of great interest to me because I'm working on a fiction novel and some of the characters are not white women like me. So there you go. I wanted to make sure that everybody in this group knows that Reese's Book Club, as in Reese Witherspoon, has a contest for underrepresented voices. That closes on June 13th. Their definition is quite broad, meaning you could have a chronic illness and be a white woman. So, I considered it. However, you need to have a completed manuscript.
Okay.
So I'm happy to put the link in the chat, but I'm only extrapolating, but I feel like her, I guess, empire, if you will, had to be tracking on American dirt, right? And the whole controversy with that. And that her team decided, let's do something to, right, be an antidote, if you will, for what's wrong in the publishing industry.
Yeah.
So they will be selecting 5 authors. They have to identify as female. And then there's a whole definition of what it means to be underrepresented that they present in detail on the website. And they're going to choose 5 people and pretty much shepherd them through the process. I mean, it's a pretty amazing opportunity.
Yeah, that is amazing. Thanks for bringing it up. I'll make sure that people I know.
Yeah, I think here it is.
Reese or Michelle, pop that in the. There you go. You got it in the.
It's called Lit Up, and I mean, you definitely have to read the fine print because at first it took me a while to drill down and see that you need a completed manuscript, not just a synopsis or 750 words or it's pretty intense in terms of the application.
Yeah, well, that's good.
So Beth and Kelsey, we've got about 20 minutes left, and we're a bunch of writers in this room. And so the question that writers have is, as you'd mentioned earlier, Kelsey, do I have the right? And as Michelle just pointed out, if I write something, do I have to have every single one of my characters be a middle-aged white man from Omaha, Nebraska? Because that's what I know, right? And so how do I write the other? And Beth, if you want to speak to that from fiction, but Kelsey also, if you're sitting in a room talking with somebody for any period of time, we tend to formulate our own beliefs for that person, right? Or we project our own beliefs on that person. We might not understand how they shave or how they, hold a fork or whatever it is. So we assume that it's the same way that we do. So can you speak to that and also speak to, and hopefully these are kind of the same thing, speak to the workshop that you're going to be doing on the 19th and how maybe that will play into it.
Well, we had some ideas for the workshop, but that was a while ago. So we didn't talk about it. But I think we're going to do some writing exercises. I mean, I really think that, well, it depends on what genre you're writing in. But if you want to create characters that are unlike you, then, you know, I think you do have to read a lot or meet people, go out of your way. You have to listen very deeply and very carefully, both to what is said and what is not said. I don't know that, I mean, I don't know. This is a good, I mean, this is a kind of question I think every writer has to figure out for themselves, you know, like, how am I going to do this? But Kelsey, do you have, I'll think hard while you're talking and see if I can come up with a better answer than that.
I think we just have to see it as an additional responsibility. I don't think we have to write all, you know, characters that are like us or anything like that. But I think we have to see, you know, anytime you're writing from a different perspective, I think we as writers do see that as a responsibility to try and render that person, you know, an authentic voice, or create an authentic voice for them. And so with that, I think it's an extra responsibility if we're writing across racial boundaries, because I think with that we or I hope we're recognizing more and more that nothing when it comes to race, you know, nothing we do is neutral, right? It's always tied to our history. It's tied to the history of what, you know, specific groups in this country have experienced, right? So if we fall into tropes or stereotypes or dehumanizing language, it's more of, you know, just a benign offense. It's more than a benign offense. It's tied to the history and almost reawakens the history of what so many people have experienced in this country. So I think it just, like Beth said, it just takes some more time. It takes listening. And I think it's true that we can never, for me, I think it's true. I spent limited time with people. Some migrants I spent a month with, but most I spent an evening with. So in an evening, what can you really understand about someone? Well, you do your best, you know, you try to ask the right questions to really get to the heart of where someone is coming from. But there's always limitations.
Yeah. So one thing that we were thinking about doing in the workshop is reading or watching. We'll have to find out what our technology is, but there's an actor whose name is Anna DeVere Smith, and what she does is she goes into communities. She's Black, and she goes into communities where there's been some kind of controversy. Like that, one of her things was about Crown Heights, and there was a lot of unrest in Crown Heights between the Hasidic Jewish community and the Caribbean community. And she goes into communities and she listens to people and she writes down their stories verbatim. And then she just puts on these one woman plays where she acts out the stories. So really listening, taking down oral histories from people, I think is a really good, you know, it's like interviewing, but really listening to verbatim, she says, to the silences, trying to listen to what's not said, noticing gestures, really training yourself to be present is, you know, that's going to help your writing no matter who you're writing about. But she has this theory that through, you know, saying what someone says over and over again, you can come to a visceral understanding of that other person. And I really, you know, like I am someone who was not a good listener to other people. Like I would have lunch with a friend of mine, and I would go away from lunch and realize I could remember everything that I said, but I couldn't remember anything that she said. And I realized I wasn't a good listener. And I thought that was probably why I had such a hard time with dialogue, because I wasn't a good listener. And so I really, trained myself to listen to people. And then, this is so weird. This is strange, but it's true. So one of the people in the world who is most different from me is my own brother. I cannot for the life of me understand my brother. And when my mother was dying, even though she had a do not resuscitate order, he wanted to keep her on the machine. He did not want to honor her wishes. And really using this technique, it was the oddest experience, just listening to him talk over and over again. And he kept saying, I have to decide whether my mother will live or die, when my two sisters and I were standing right there to help him make that decision. The repetition of I and my over and over again, I just really realized that he felt on him. Suddenly I could understand being my brother and why he was having such a hard time with this decision. And, I just think we don't listen to each other well enough, but we do live in a town here that's like 95% white. So how do you get the chance to do that kind of deep listening to other people if you don't want all of your characters to be white? That's a question I don't know the answer to. If we're talking about writing about people of other racial backgrounds, we have to listen, but we have to somehow move out of our own limited spheres.
I think too, there's a lot of ways to do that too. Okay. Even in a very white community like Bend, I think, reading is a huge vehicle for listening, right? Reading either about characters who identify the way we're thinking about creating our characters, or authors, and really paying attention to the ways in which other authors that we respect have done it. I think that's one of the things that helped me a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's it's an aesthetic issue. It's a ethical issue. Like James Baldwin said, the world is now white and it will never be white again. So, in a way, that's good. No, does anybody have any comments so I can quit talking? Yes, no. I think reading. I just wrote an essay on Prague, and I've only been to Prague once. I lived there for 3 weeks, but I was having a really hard time with that essay until I watched a documentary, and the documentary was about this Jewish man who had escaped Prague by clinging to the underneath of a train. It was this incredible story. And so it's his story, and then also the story of another Jewish man who had survived 3 concentration camps and became a communist in Prague after the war. And so there were a lot of conversations, and I just watched that documentary over and over again until I felt like I could understand them and use their voices in this essay. Of course, I use them with attribution. I don't make up characters based on them, but there was no way that I could have just imagined what that was like. The imagination is not universal. It's very grounded in life. So, and I agree, Mary, the best fiction should reflect a range of diversity in a lot of different ways. So.
Are there any other questions or things you've wondered or struggled with as you're writing?
Or what should we do for our workshop? Tell us.
Well, I'm already signed up, so whatever you do is gonna will work for me. But I think that that's the big question is as Kelsey pointed out, early on, there's a question that Linda just put in there. Do I have the right to have female protagonists or even female characters? Right? I've spent half of my life, or not half of my life, half of the people that I know are female, right? But I'm not one. So do I have the right to have a female character? Irene always tells me that my female characters suck, and it's probably because I'm not female. But how do we, how do we approach it? And I think that you've brought some ideas to that, and I think that listening and that understanding, and asking questions, and and even as Michelle pointed out, that sensitivity training, have, as you did, Beth, have somebody who speaks that language check and make sure that you're not saying that the couch is in the microwave, right? or whatever. So I'm always interested in that writing the other part of writing, and maybe not even doing it so much in a politically correct way, doing it in a real way. That's the things that I'd like to.
Yeah, I think.
Who's got other? Michelle, you got a question?
Well, it's a question, but also just sort of an observation that I read a comment on Beth's website that resonated with me about what it means to be human. So in the novel that I'm working on, even though there are male characters that I'm giving a voice to, and I'm not male. I'm also not a soldier, and he's a soldier. I spoke with my writing mentor about that, and he said, do you remember what it felt like to be 17? Do you know what it feels like to be terrified? So to identify with other aspects of the character that we share commonalities, and I'm actually trying to achieve something in this novel that kind of breaks down the binary oppositions to say, can there be anything in common between a soldier from Harlan County, Kentucky, and a Korean shaman? There can be. It seems completely crazy on the surface, but that's where I feel like it's challenging, but I want to break through to the human connection and not just be compartmentalized by gender, by sexuality, by class. I mean, so I'm curious to know in your journey, Beth, and I'm speaking more to Beth than Kelsey because I'm talking about fiction, and any others who have thoughts on that. Because why would we want to remain like in this binary, space? It's limiting.
Well, no, I agree with you. And I agree, I have a grandchild who is trans, and we were talking about the fact that that the binaries are an artificial construct, and that males and females are actually more alike than they are different. And I think that's true. Of course, white people and Black people are more alike than they are different. There are those universal aspects, but in writing, the universal kind of arises out of the specific. And so I have a real conflict about this, because there is a way I want to break out of it, and a way that I think I can. And then on the other hand, imagination is not separate from lived experience. Even science fiction, that the most fantastic stories in the world come out of lived experience. And so I think that, you know, like Kelsey's saying, that we just have to recognize that and take responsibility for it, not assume that that our viewpoint is the universal, as has been historically. The white and male perspectives have been assumed to be universal, and they're not. Eliza.
Eliza's got a comment.
Yeah, Eliza.
Thanks, everyone. It's my first time here, so I'm just wanting to, what I notice, what comes to my mind about writing about racism is the importance to evoke emotion in the reader and bring the universal human needs and feelings to the surface so that awareness of our common humanity can bring change for compassion, kindness, and empathy for everyone, opening doors for global unity and the advancement of our species is what I was thinking that I was hearing everyone talking about.
That was very well put. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's our goal, probably.
I think
Right.
too, like writing is such an act of empathy in and of itself. And so I think there's so much that can be done just through deeply empathizing, whether it's imagining yourself going through the motions of the, you know, the character that Beth was watching in the documentary. There's so many different ways to practice deeply empathizing with someone, and I think that happens or helps us as writers.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked what Michelle was saying about bringing our own experiences as vehicles for empathy too. You know, I think I drew a lot on my own experiences of trauma to write about these stories, right? And very different, you know, but there are different commonalities here, or commonalities that you can find to really to empathize and to have that come through in our writing.
Mm-hmm. Well, it looks like this is to be,
Gerald's got a question.
Well, more a comment, really. I've so appreciated this conversation. I loved, Eliza, what you said. It's a summary of the intention when writing about race, and Michelle's comments, you know, trying to identify feelings regardless of situations that appear different on the surface. And Beth and Kelsey, you know, I think you've done an extraordinary job of bringing things forward so that we can be enlightened and learn and grow and, you know, develop compassion for others. And one of the ways I think you do that is that you work with your own gifts. You know, you have individual experiences that the rest of us don't have. You know, the fellow that you met on the bus, the fact that you were married to a Mexican for 40 years, you know, whatever, you have brought those experiences inside yourself and shared them in a way that we, at least as a reader, I trust what you have to say because you own those gifts and what is distinctive about your own experience. So thank you for that.
well, thank you.
I think that's an excellent place to leave. And I'm completely looking forward to this workshop on the 19th. I've been in workshops with Beth and Kelsey before, and I know that it will inform our writing and our thinking, and I'm super excited about it. I'm going to put in the chat really quick here links to the to our website and where the workshop is, and then Jane's workshop is on the 13th. So there's a link there to that too, if you're interested in going to Jane Kirkpatrick's workshop, which I'm also signed up for. So I'll see you there, Jane. Any final comments, Paige? We all good? Anything from the cat?
Oliver. He says thank you to everyone for joining. He enjoyed it very much.
All right.
He only napped a little bit. This is wonderful. Such great content. Thank you so much to all of our wonderful presenters and speakers and readers tonight, as well as everyone who joined in to give something to the discussion. We really value all of this community participation. So check out our website. There will be a follow-up survey. We'd love to have you fill it out to tell us how wonderful tonight was and what other programs you want to see coming to your library. Have a great night, everyone. We will see you again soon.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.